Hey everyone, Jared and Whitney here from Travel Therapy Mentor. Welcome to the sixth and final week of our Travel Therapy 101 mini-series. Today we'll be talking about tax homes.
This has been a 6-week series that we've done on the basics of travel therapy. And like Jared said, this is our last week. Over the last several weeks, we have discussed the topics including what is travel therapy and how does it work. We talked about travel therapy pay. We talked about travel therapy housing, the licensing process, recruiters, and then today we're going to talk about tax homes and why that's important for travel therapists to understand about. So we'll get started today talking about today's topic, tax homes, and why you need to know as a travel therapist.
So let's start with the IRS definition of a tax home. It's defined as the entire city or general area where your main place of business or work is located, regardless of where you maintain your family home. If you regularly work in more than one place, your tax home is the general area where your main place of business or work is located. Generally, this is going to be your permanent residence, where you return to between contracts, where you take time off, all those things. But it has more to do with where you have a history of earning income and conducting business than it does with just an address you put down, say your parents' house or something like that.
So why is this important for travel therapists to know about? What does this have to do with us? So part of being a travel therapist is you're able to receive tax-free stipends as part of our pay package for going and working places. And a lot of you guys probably know this. Hopefully you watched our Travel Pay 101 video where we talked about how pay is broken down between the hourly and the taxable. But in order to qualify to have your stipends for housings, meals, and incidentals untaxed, you need to be maintaining what's called a tax home. And this is an IRS guideline. This doesn't have to do with the hospital or the travel therapy company. It has to do with the IRS and the way that we get taxed as workers in the United States. If you're not maintaining what they call a tax home, then there's no reason for them to give you what are these tax-free stipends. If you were just a travel therapist who just kind of moved around the country from job to job to job and did not maintain a home base where you have financial ties, you'd more or less be kind of like a gypsy. You'd just be moving from place to place. You didn't have a home base, you didn't have a tax home, and they call this being an itinerant worker. And if you do it like this and you don't maintain a tax home, then they have no reason to give you these tax-free stipends and you don't qualify, so the travel therapy company can't legally pay you that way.
Yeah, and those stipends are really what makes travel jobs so lucrative. It's, a permanent therapist pay is usually all taxed. Some travelers take their pay all taxed, those that choose not to have a tax home. Usually it's a little bit higher, but it's not significant like it is if you're a travel therapist with a tax home. Usually you make 1.5 to 2 times as much as a permanent job. And that's because of the hourly pay that is taxed combined with the stipends for meals, housing, and incidentals that are untaxed if you qualify.
So like Jared said, and like we talked about in our travel therapy pay video, as a permanent worker, you just get paid this hourly amount that's all taxed. So normally if you work a normal job, you might make $35, $40 an hour, and the IRS taxes all of that. When you're a travel therapist, you get an hourly, which is taxed, plus the stipend, which is not taxed, but only if you qualify. So why does the IRS do this? Why do they do these tax-free stipends for some types of workers? So because there are certain types of workers, such as travel therapists or travel nurses and other professionals that travel away from their home base to go and work other places, the IRS says, well, you're maintaining a permanent home where you have expenses, you have to pay taxes. We're going to give you a tax break on these other expenses that you have when you go away for work. I think another good example to think about some other types of workers that also qualify for these tax-free stipends would be like a pilot. So a pilot has a home base, a home airport that they work out of. They might have a mortgage and a family there, and they have their car registered there and all that. But then sometimes they have to fly their plane and go stay somewhere else for the night in another city, and they might have to pay for meals and a hotel and things like that while they're there. So they get a stipend for that money, and it's not, for those expenses while they're away on work, and it's not taxed. Now, typically for a pilot, it's only going to be a couple nights, but another type of worker like an electrician or a lineman that goes and travels away from home for work, they might actually travel and be there for a couple weeks or a couple months, and they're going to have lots of housing, meals, and incidentals expenses for that work away from home. So those types of travel workers also can qualify for tax-free stipends, and that's supposed to be the same thing for us, although we do know that a lot of travel therapists kind of live a continuous travel lifestyle where they don't really spend a lot of time and actually work at home. But it is very important to make sure that you are maintaining the rules and trying to meet the guidelines as best as you can so that you do qualify.
Yep. There are 3 main requirements, and ideally you want to meet 3 of the 3. But there are situations where 2 of the 3 will still count as a tax home, and this is a good place to consult a tax professional to make sure that you have the right idea and your situation is valid. The 3 requirements: maintain a regular business in that area, and that usually includes employment. Have a permanent residence or physical residence at your tax home or the metro area where you last worked, and this is place that you're financially responsible for the residence's upkeep. So things like mortgage, rent, repairs, taxes, those kind of things while you're away from the home. And then the last one is that you don't abandon the tax home and that you plan to return there at least 30 days per year. So it can't just be that you had a house and then you just leave for several years and you don't go back to it. That would be abandoning the tax home. And you want to make sure that you have some kind of financial responsibility in the area because that is a main requirement.
So as you can see, it's a lot more complicated than just writing down an address. A lot of travelers are under the impression that if someone asks for your tax home or your permanent residence, you just write down an address, mom and dad's house or whatever. It's a lot more than that in the eyes of the IRS. So a lot of folks want to know, what kind of documentation do I need to keep as proof? What kind of records do I need to keep to show that I'm maintaining a tax home? It's important to know that the only time you're really going to have to show proof for this is if you get audited by the IRS, which there's usually a pretty low likelihood of that happening. But on the off chance that it did happen, if you couldn't prove that you were keeping a tax home and you were earning these tax-free stipends all along for years, I think they can even audit you several years down the line, you would owe back taxes on all those stipends that you received.
Back taxes and penalties.
And penalties. So it's really important that you do maintain these records on the off chance that you did get audited. Some records you would want to make sure you have: if you are renting from someone like mom and dad's house or sharing with a roommate, make sure you have a lease that's signed by all the parties involved. It shows how much rent you pay. Your rent does have to be fair market value for whatever that dwelling is in your area. So if you're renting a room in a house at mom and dad's or your family members, you can't just give them $50 or some grocery money. You need to actually pay them rent, and you need to show record that you have paid them rent. So we highly recommend checks. A lot of people like to do Venmo and that kind of thing, but if you have checks, then you actually have a paper trail that you can show as evidence if you have to mail it into the IRS. So show evidence of that. If you have a mortgage, that's pretty easy. You can just keep a record of your mortgage, keep a record of some of your bills and expenses that you paid at your house. That's pretty legit if you have your own home there. You might also want to keep some records of those times that you returned home. So like Jared said, you want to make sure you don't abandon your tax home, which means you shouldn't be away for years on end without going back there. So like us, if we're from Virginia and we take a travel assignment in Hawaii and work in Hawaii for 52 weeks straight, it's pretty obvious we didn't come back from Hawaii to Virginia unless we took 2 weeks off in our contract and had a plane ticket that showed we flew back. Or in our situation, we did a lot of contracts in North Carolina, only about 3 hours from home. So we drove home on weekends. We were at home for a week or so between contracts all the time because we were within driving distance. So a good thing to keep there would be evidence of gas receipts and things like that, just to show you were in the area and you had some time off from work where you traveled back home.
Yep.
And again, you might only need to show this if you get audited by the IRS. There are some travel companies that will ask for you to tell them your tax home address so they can keep that for their records, or they might want to see a copy of your lease or a bill just so they can keep that on file for their records. But not all travel companies ask for it.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that all of this is your responsibility. A lot of travelers, especially new travelers that we talk to, they just rely on anything the recruiter says. And they'll say like, okay, well, the recruiter said I just need to write down an address and then I'm fine, I get the stipends. Remember that if in the future, say 2 years down the line, you get audited for this year, which can happen, a prior year audit, and they ask for proof of why you got these stipends, the recruiter is not at all liable for that. It's up to you to have the documentation and everything that you need. So do your research. Don't accept a contract with tax-free stipends if you don't know for sure that you meet the tax home rules. That's setting yourself up for potential issues in the future, and paying back taxes and penalties would be an awful thing. Several years down the line, you don't run into that situation. So just make sure you have all this taken care of before you ever start traveling. It's always a good idea to contact a tax professional. They can help you make sure that you have a tax home. They can also help you actually file your taxes, which a lot of travelers have issues with, especially early on. And some good places to check out, traveltax.com. They have a frequently asked questions section, which I learned a ton from when we started. This was like 6 years ago. I was on that site learning a lot, and we've learned a ton from Joe Smith and over the years. And then also irs.gov. There's a ton of information there about tax homes, what qualify, different examples of what does and doesn't qualify. So there's a lot of research you can do.
Yeah, it's really important that you guys know that we are not tax professionals. You know, we're physical therapists. We've been there and done this for our own situation. But a lot of people will come to us with specific tax questions, and we really cannot answer your specific tax questions. We're just here to educate you on where you need to go to do further reading and further research and get yourself a tax professional that you can talk to at traveltax.com. If you go to their website, you can actually call them. They do free phone consultations, and they're really helpful. They can answer a lot of your questions either by phone, by email, or in their frequently asked questions section. But again, don't ask us your specific tax scenarios because we can't answer all of them. We're not tax professionals.
Yeah, we know our own situation, but everyone's situation is so different. It's very difficult to give any kind of advice.
Yeah, and we actually did do a video interview with Joe Smith, who's the owner at Travel Tax, and that is on our YouTube channel. It's Travel Therapy Mentor on YouTube. You can scroll back to the beginning of our videos. We did an hour-long interview with him where we asked him a lot of Q&A, a lot of questions, kind of gave some different scenarios of different traveler situations. So that might be interesting for you guys to look at, to watch that video to learn a little bit more. He kind of answered some of those frequently asked questions, like what if I have this, and what if I'm a student and I want to, use my parents' address? What if my spouse is in the military? All those types of questions. So check out that video to learn more.
Yep.
So just to give a summary of everything we talked about today with travel therapists, tax home situations. It's important to know if you want to receive the tax-free stipends as a travel therapist, you must be maintaining a proper tax home. You must meet 2 out of 3 at least of those requirements that we mentioned, including maintain a permanent residence and an address where you are financially responsible for the expenses, the rent, the mortgage, the other expenses at the home. You must conduct business in the area either by employment or some other ways to conduct business could be considered having your car registered there, being a registered voter there, having your driver's license there, and so forth. And you must return to that home fairly often, at least 30 days a year, so that you are not abandoning that tax home. Receiving the tax-free stipends is one way that you can make a lot more money as a travel therapist. If you're not maintaining a tax home and you have to get all your stipends taxed, you're not going to make as much money. So you really want to make sure that you dot your I's and cross your T's when it comes to this stuff if you want to get those tax-free stipends and make more money. And as Jared mentioned, it's really important to do your own research. Visit those websites we mentioned, contact a tax professional, find out for yourself, make sure that you're doing all the right things. Don't just trust your recruiter to know all of these things and tell you all the right things to do.
Yep. On Saturday on the Travel Therapy Mentor website, we're going to be releasing an article with a lot of this information in written form if you would prefer to see it that way. If you missed any of our prior content on this 101 series, you can find the full Travel Therapy 101 series on the website traveltherapymentor.com, including links to all the articles, videos, as well as the podcast.
And don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel or our podcast channel if you'd like to watch all the old videos or listen to them on audio version for our Travel Therapy 101 series. We also try to do one video every week. Usually on Sundays, we record it live on Facebook and we upload them to our YouTube and our podcast. So if you like to watch videos or listen to the audio in a podcast version, please subscribe to those channels so you can make sure not to miss any of our future content. And also don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram where we continue to post articles, videos every week, and lots of informative content about travel therapy. And we are getting ready to go on a epic road trip, so don't worry, I'm going to be posting all the pictures. That's on our Instagram page at Travel Therapy Mentor.
Thanks for tuning in, and feel free to reach out to us for any questions or any feedback. And definitely, if you need anything getting started with your own travel therapy journey in the future, feel free to send us an email or a message on Facebook or Instagram.
Thank y'all for joining, and we hope that you learned a lot during our Travel Therapy 101 series.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.